Thank you for joining us on Africa Update this week, where we bring you updates on what's happening on the African continent. And I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. Now, an exclusive interview with France 24, Rwandan President Paul Kagame declared Rwanda's readiness to go to war with the Democratic Republic of Congo, if necessary, stating that they are ready to fight and are not afraid of anything. France 24 has more.
Is war with DRC a real possibility?
Well, you referred to what President Tshisekedi was answering or raising as questions. Among other things, I think he has told you and others several times, even recently. He was talking about taking war to Rwanda and removing the government and blah, 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 all kinds of things. Well, if somebody is saying that, and in this kind of situation, well, on one hand, you may think this person is bluffing or he has nothing else to say other than that. But at the same time, given our own situation and experience and history, we don't take anything for granted.
So you're ready to fight if need be?
Whether this Eastern Congo situation and what comes out flows over to our territory or anything else, we are ready to fight. Because we are there as a result of having fought for our own rights and existence. There's no question about it. So we are not shying away from saying if anybody finds us or threatens us, it's not a secret.
Are you afraid of Western sanctions because of the presence denounced of your troops in DRC?
Let me tell you this. With our history, with all these things we are talking about, the way we have been shaped by these hardships and injustices, and it doesn't matter by who, we are not afraid of anything.
Wow, very, very strong words from the president of Rwanda, Kagame. I'm smiling because my guest in the studio, Ambassador Haruna Wakani, he had this smirk when I said very strong words from our guest. He's joining me in the studio right here to continue and discuss this and more on the show is Ambassador Haruna Wakani. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, viewers.
Okay, so you heard that and you already had a reaction. So just let's get into it.
Well, that side of Africa, like any other side, is just a microcosm of what has been, let me say, imposed on Africa by the European colonial masters long time ago. And what we see playing out today, generally in the landscape, is impacts of decisions that had been long time ago. The conflict between countries across Africa, not just between Rwanda and the DRC, is the result of the imprecise demarcation of Africa into countries by the Berlin Conference way back in the 1800s. Europeans sat down and looked at the whole continent of Africa, took their knife and just carved out places and called them countries. They are spheres of influence, depending on where, how far, how deep their explorers went or reached upon the African continent. And therefore, you will see boundaries that are very conflicting. Boundaries that dissected the same people, part in this country and part in that country. And therefore, today, if you expect that there will be absolute sovereignty in some places, it will almost be impossible to obtain. The people in the DRC and Rwanda are the same. However, there has been this sharp boundary division. And then the colonial masters are still interested in what's going on. There is the issue of resources, particularly mineral resources, that is defining relationships between one country and the other. Since the emergence of M23 rebels in the DRC, Paul Kagame had been interested in the DRC for a very long time. And of course, minus anywhere else on the continent, Rwandan soldiers have been very active in the DRC. And you can see that it is beyond the two countries alone. The international interest in these countries supersedes every other thing. And therefore, even the seeking for peace between these countries becomes much more complicated because the interests are diverse, they are quite intrinsic, and it makes it very difficult to even begin to talk of maybe peace. Now, the president, with all due respect, is saying yes, he is ready to go to war. But he has been at war before now. So it's not a question of being ready to go to war. It is being ready to enforce more violence perhaps on the DRC for reasons best known to him and his colleagues in power in Rwanda. The DRC has literally been balkanized, if we can use that word, between various forces or interests that are there. And you can see for the first time that even jihadist rebels are already finding foot in the DRC because of the richness of the mineral resources that God has given that country. So now, mineral resources have become truly a curse almost everywhere in Africa. Wherever you find minerals, you always find conflicts associated with this, which people are not ready to explain. And we have this difficulty too, that some of these conflicts as we see them are the result of economic collapse in the various countries, such that even governments are unable to manage their populations, manage the economies such a way that people's mind can be off some of these conflicts and look into more productive means of sustenance. However, it has become almost obvious that a lot of these crises are actually manufactured within the confines of the World Bank and the IMF. They are the harbingers of these conflicts almost everywhere, because when they give loans to these countries and create situations that we give you loan today, we insist you must devalue your currency. Upon the devaluation, you automatically see that this country can no longer pay. And when countries are unable to pay their loans, it becomes obvious that they cannot manage their economies or manage their people. And then from there you begin to see different kinds of conflicts emerging that are very, very difficult for African leaders to manage. So,
Ambassador, I know you have a lot to say. So, I know as the questions go on, you'll say some more. But you said something earlier, which I would like to go back to, and that's the fact that the Rwandans and the DRCs are the same people who just have had a knife go through them. And I would think that since they're the same people, that they should be able to somehow live together. So how is this oneness or sameness not interpreting into living peacefully?
This requires going back to history. When Africa was balkanized, Rwanda and DRC are a bit different, slightly different in the sense that both are French. However, today, as you know, Rwanda has moved away from the French history into like a non-colonial language sphere. They are trying to say, as a result of the 1994 genocide, and particularly the role of France in that genocide, they've decided to even drop the French language as their official language. However, it does not change their history that they were once a French colony. Similarly, in the DRC, you have the same thing, literally. However, these colonialists had given an impression to say, don't look at this, your neighbor, as the same. You are no longer the same. You are in a different country. You are therefore supposed to behave like this. They are crooks. They are this. They are that. Such that even though we share boundaries, there are real chasms between us such that you do no longer see yourselves as one African people, but one colonial heritage on each side. If you take very closely here, the people across the Nigerian border in Benin Republic, and us here in Nigeria, we speak the same language. But you have a dividing line. And they go over there, they say, we are Beninese. You come here, we are Nigerians. Yes, English and French. However, they are both Yorubas or Nupes across the border. However, the militancy or patriotism that you see between these countries makes it such that we cannot even come together to forget about the past and see how best also we can move forward. Now, it's almost everywhere across the boundaries in Africa. If we were to take each boundary one after the other, you will see that these sharp divisions exist in such a way that we are unable to come together because we have been the product of different governments across.
Okay. Now, this is this what you said now is open up a different conversation. I'd like to touch it, but let's just go back to this first, and maybe we'll get back to that later. And now, from his comments, I don't know, it's Africa ready for this, for another war, seeing as the member countries, the regional groups and blocs are trying to bring member countries, who have followed the violent takeovers by the military, trying to get them back together. Can we afford another war between? It's not even a civil war. This is now between two countries.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, it's beyond expecting another war. It's just a continuation of a war that has been there, has been simmering. These wars or conflicts have been simmering between these countries for so long. And the first time Rwandan soldiers intervened in the DRC had been quite some years ago. And so it is not new. Now, the only problem perhaps we may be dealing with now is a possible intensification of this conflict. And DRC, as you know, has literally been battered by all these different forms of conflicts that you can't even explain. Now, it has taken the United Nations to deploy troops, peacekeeping troops, that have ended up unable to bring peace, rather have created more social, economic problems in the country to a point where some had to be withdrawn.
Okay.
Good. So when people call for peacekeeping interventions here and there by the United Nations, African Union, ECOWAS, IGAD, or whatever, you find that at the end of the day, it might not pay.
Okay.
It might not pay. And we need to just go back to the source of these conflicts, namely the resource control.
Okay.
That is quite obvious. And these resources are actually in competition by the internationals. The big companies that are quiet, nobody knows their names. They are really behind all these conflicts as we see them.
Okay. All right, so it's time for Africa to wake up and take themselves seriously and stop allowing external, interference into the continents.
Definitely.
But now, just before we leave this conversation and move to South Africa, elections in Rwanda is coming, July 15th, particularly for the presidential election. How do you think this would affect Kagame's fourth term bid?
Well, Kagame, it's a difficult one because there's literally no opposition.
Okay.
Even if you have names, it remains names. No effective opposition. And therefore, it could be an election by stamping, an election by anointing, and as usual, tenure extension. Now, there are palpable fears that these are the beginnings of creating another dynasty. Instead of a truly democratic society.
Monarchical democracy.
Yes, of course. So we are not very far from that kind of setting because from tenure extension to tenure changes to suddenly you find yourself in a situation where the parliaments that are supposed to regulate these leaders are already in the pockets of these executives. And therefore, if you expect that ever there will be sound legislation against these monarchical movements, it's almost impossible to imagine, because we have seen what has happened in so many African countries, that once somebody gets into power, the next thing will be tenure extension or an adjustment in the tenure itself. And from that, before you know it, it is a dynasty.
All right, let's move to South Africa, where Sir Ramaphosa promises a new era for the people. He was sworn in a second term as the president on Wednesday in a ceremony in the administrative capital of Pretoria. After his re-election, with the help from a coalition of parties, a first in the country's 30-year rule, Ramaphosa was administered the oath of office in a public ceremony at the Union Buildings, the seat of government, by Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Africa News has more for us.
Cyril Ramaphosa sworn in for a second full term as South Africa's president.
So help me God.
His inauguration as head of a multi-party government comes just 3 weeks after elections in which his African National Congress failed to secure a majority.
The voters of South Africa did not give any single political party the full mandate to govern our country alone. They have directed us to work together to address their plight and realize their aspirations. They have also been unequivocal in expressing their disappointment and disapproval of our performance in some of the areas in which we have failed them.
Ramaphosa said the country had begun a new era and pledged that his government would work to improve basic living conditions for all citizens. He also affirmed his commitment to work with all political parties represented in the government of national unity.
We must reject every attempt to divide or distract us, to sow doubt and cynicism, or to turn us against one another. Those who seek to stand in our way, those who seek to inflame tensions in our country, will not succeed.
Ramaphosa's next task is to appoint a cabinet. This will likely involve complex negotiations with the various parties making up the coalition, some with very different philosophies.
There you have it. Now, Ambassador, let's talk about that. You know, South Africa has been on a conversation at least for the last 4 or 3 episodes of this program, and you know, it's come to a head now with the inauguration and the forming of a unity government with, I think, Democratic Alliance and then maybe a few other parties. How do you see that alliance working out for South Africa?
Well, it's a complex scenario that has emerged in South Africa, but I think the bold statement made through this election is the ANC, as the dominant party of Mandela, let me say, and his colleagues in the apartheid struggle, have finally found themselves failing to provide the kind of leadership that the people expected. All the aspirations, all the feelings of independence from apartheid regime and what have you that the citizens of South Africa felt they will have through the ANC has failed, kind of, because poverty is still very high. And like we said, these are some of the problems, that you find economies that are not working. And why are these economies not working when you have resources that are more than abundant in these countries? The thin line is manipulation still from the Western institutions. IMF, World Bank, you can't remove them from all this. You see that they craft things that are so difficult to manage, and ultimately citizen discontent becomes very high. Now, South Africa has been forced to adopt this practice of the parliamentary government that now gives other parties a chunk of the government, because the ANC was unable to secure a clear majority. So they have to align with other parties, particularly the Democratic Alliance that came second. Now, here is a scenario. You have an ANC government that is formed on anti-apartheid movement or philosophy, and you are forced to combine with a Democratic Alliance that is still apartheid-based.
Wow, opposite sides.
Yes, so you have diametrically opposed parties that are forced to work together because the citizens of South Africa say enough of ANC domination, we want something different. And they got it. They went out and voted. Thank God, in South Africa, at least the elections are seen to have been fair and free. That's why the voices of the people spoke. Unlike in other countries that you see elections being manipulated in any way, and you just say somebody has won an election when apparently and clearly there was nothing like an election. South Africa was lucky to have had this voice clearly sent to ANC. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa will, let's say, escaped through the back door to even remain president. Good.
Why do you say that?
Well, even during the elections, if you monitor, you would see that they were so jittery that the losses would have been even higher than what they recorded. So they were lucky to have escaped with still a kind of votes that gave them a kind of lead, but not enough to form a government. All right. So they are already weakened. The Democratic Alliance has seen now that they are a voice not to ignore. And going into government together would mean they will want to continue to show that there were things ANC was doing wrongly, and we have come to help you correct those things. Next time, we might even have a majority. Good. So it means it is an acid test for the ANC as a party to be able to understand that anybody who gets into power and you are unable to listen to the voices of the people that brought you, supposedly, you run the risk, if there was a good election, to be thrown out. And that's the challenge Cyril Ramaphosa is going to have. Now, secondly, the economy is also faltering. The economy is not healthy enough to enable government to fulfill its promises to the citizens. And with that, you begin to see that South Africa might slide into confusion, other than what he was like saying over that clip. People coming in between them to create chaos or division, or he has to manage that very skillfully. Otherwise, it already exists. The citizens are complaining. South Africa has 37% unemployment rate, apparently the highest in the world. How are you going to manage that with now a coalition government that people in the parliament might come and tell you, no, we can't go with you, because they want to undermine the ANC?
Okay. All right. So we're going to go on a short break, and when we come back, we'll go into the Kenya economic situation. Please just stay with us. Welcome back to Africa Update here on Trust TV. Let's get into the Kenya situation, where the people in the country have returned to the streets of Nairobi on Thursday night, tearing down CCTV cameras, setting fire to tires and blocking roads to protest against proposed tax hikes in a finance bill that is being tabled in Parliament. Earlier on Thursday, clashes between police and the protesters took place, and tear gas was used and equally water cannons to disperse the crowds. More of the story.
We are going to pass another finance bill without our approval. We are going to add our voice to this, and we need them to understand that we are not okaying what they want to force on us.
Kenya is riddled by poverty. We have no education. Most of our people are unlearned. They cannot write, they cannot read. And the government still wants to pull away the budget of education, of healthcare services, of our teachers.
Kenya. Apparently, the economic situation is not just a Nigerian thing. It seems to be everywhere, global, and even on the African continent. Now, that protest saw one person die and over 200 people injured. So, what do you have to say about that?
Well, it's quite unfortunate that we still have to come back to the same issues. Africa is in the hands of the West. And what you see as protest in various countries or discontent by citizens is the result of economic policies that are engineered and imposed from outside. Citizens are now being asked to pay more to the government to enable the government to sustain itself in power by way of higher taxation by any means whatsoever. Government will be looking for any name to give a particular tax. We hardly or nearly managed such a crisis in Nigeria recently by the cybersecurity tax or levy that the government wanted to impose. These impositions are not from the government itself. They came from the prescriptions of the World Bank and IMF to say if you want, you needed to go back and raise more money from your people to be able to sustain because your economic policies or practices are not in sync with the economic realities in your country and what have you. Whereas it's the same institution, Bretton Woods institution, that imposed some of these loans that we are now paying back, and because we are paying, we are unable to have resources to take care of our citizens, and because of that gap, government is now asked to come back and start taxing citizens. Now, citizens of Kenya only said, look, we can't be taxed anymore. You've taxed us already. We are almost taxed to death. And therefore, let us go and face the government. The police are there, yes. People are no longer afraid of the police, as you can see in the images of what has been happening in Kenya. Now, it's not only Kenya, it's almost everywhere. We have this economic crisis because the total debt stock across Africa has become so unbearable. And with paying these debts means no development. That's why everywhere you see democracy, you see stunted growth and discontent across the citizenry. So leaders have to be very, very careful listening to IMF and the World Bank. Rather, come back home, sit down and work out something that is feasible for your citizens, because the first initiative or essence of governance is the welfare of your citizens, not satisfying some organizations out there.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Haruna Wakani, for joining us on Africa Update today and having this conversation. Time did not permit us to really get into them. Thank you so much. It's been quite an insightful and informative conversation on Africa Update on Trust TV. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream for more of our content on news, programs, and documentaries. Same time, same place next week. I am Chiamaka Nwafor.